My name is Mark, I'm 29, and my own parents gifted me a brand new suitcase on my birthday and told me to get out of their house. Before I tell you how they tried to sue me for $30,000 just a few months later, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. It all happened on a Tuesday, my 29th birthday. I remember coming home from work, the weight of the day pressing down on me, only amplified by the silence from my phone. No calls, no texts, not from my mother, Diane, not from my father, Robert, and certainly not from my younger brother, Tom. An entire day had passed, and to them, I might as well have not existed. On the drive home, I'd done something I hadn't done in years. I made an impulse buy. I stopped at a grocery store and bought myself a small single-serving cake from the bakery section. It was plain vanilla with a thick, waxy frosting that I knew would taste like chemicals. It looked pathetic sitting on the passenger seat, a sad little monument to a forgotten birthday. When I walked in, the house was eerily quiet. Then I saw them. They weren't in the living room watching TV as usual. They were seated at the formal dining room table, a place reserved for holidays and important guests. It was like a tribunal. My father sat at the head of the table, his arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of grim resolution. My mother sat to his right, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the polished wood of the table. And Tom, the golden child, was leaning back in his chair on the other side, a smug little smirk playing on his lips, practically vibrating with anticipation. On the table between them, perfectly centered, was a large, elegantly wrapped box. For one ridiculous, fleeting second, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this is a surprise. Maybe they remembered after all. "Happy birthday, Mark," my mother said. Her voice was flat, hollow, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice you use with a stranger. I placed my sad little cake on the kitchen counter, trying to hide it behind the fruit bowl. Thanks," I mumbled. "You really didn't have to. Open it," my father commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. My hands felt clumsy as I walked to the table. The wrapping paper was thick and expensive. I carefully tore it open. Inside was a high-end, hard-shell suitcase, the kind I'd only ever seen in travel magazines, the ones that cost more than my monthly food budget. My heart didn't just sink. It plummeted. This wasn't a gift for a vacation. This was a message. "We want you to pack your things," Diane said softly, finally lifting her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were as cold and empty as a winter sky. "We want you out. By tomorrow morning." The air was sucked out of my lungs. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Out? What are you talking about? Why?" Tom let out a short, sharp laugh. "Because we're tired of your attitude?" he sneered, the words laced with years of resentment. "We're sick of you walking around with your nose in the air, judging us with your little budgets and your spreadsheets. This isn't your home anymore, Mark," my father added, his voice like stones grinding together. "We've done our part. We raised you. We're done now." I looked from his stony face to my mother's impassive one, searching desperately for some sign that this was a cruel, elaborate joke. I found nothing. No remorse, no sadness. Just a chilling finality. I finally looked down at the suitcase, the sleek black shell reflecting the cold overhead light. My voice was hoarse when I finally spoke. "This suitcase. It's the most thoughtful thing you've given me since I moved back in." I picked it up. It was surprisingly light. I turned and walked towards the stairs leading to my basement room, the suitcase handle cool and smooth in my hand. As I took the first step, I heard the scrape of a chair behind me, then the distinct sound of a knife cutting through a cake. It was followed by a low murmur of conversation, and then a light, relieved laugh from my mother. They were eating my birthday cake. I didn't look back. I just descended into the basement, into the room that had been my cage for 2 years. How did it come to this? Just 2 years ago, I was their savior, their only hope. It all started with a single, desperate phone call that was built on a foundation of lies. A phone call that would end up costing me everything I had ever worked for. 2 years before that disastrous birthday, my life was meticulously organized. It was a life of quiet discipline, built on a foundation of spreadsheets and sacrifice. At 27, I was a junior marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was a steady paycheck, and I treated every dollar with the respect it deserved. My one-bedroom apartment was small, with a kitchen so tiny I could touch the stove and the refrigerator at the same time, but it was my sanctuary. It was mine. My entire existence revolved around a singular, all-consuming goal, a goal that lived and breathed in a color-coded spreadsheet on my laptop: house down payment. Every decision I made was filtered through the lens of this goal. My car was a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla with a permanent dent in the passenger door from a forgotten parking lot incident. But it was paid off, which to me was more beautiful than any new car smell. Lunch was a daily ritual of self-control. While my coworkers, including my friend Rebecca, would head out to the trendy food trucks or the new sandwich shop, I'd politely decline. "You sure, Mark?" Rebecca would ask, jangling her keys. "They have that spicy chicken wrap you like." "Nah, I'm good," I'd say, pulling out my brown paper bag. Gotta stick to the plan. I'd eat my turkey on wheat and an apple at my desk, sometimes feeling a pang of social isolation. But then I'd open my spreadsheet, add the $12 I'd just saved to a running total, and watch the projection chart tick a tiny fraction closer to my dream. The feeling of progress was more satisfying than any spicy chicken wrap. I was building something. I was in control. My family, on the other hand, was the one area of my life where I had absolutely no control. They operated on a different planet, one governed by whims and wants, not needs and budgets. The gravitational center of this chaotic planet was my younger brother, Tom. At 21, he was a college student majoring in what seemed to be spending our parents' money. He was the undisputed, unapologetic, golden child. Sunday dinners were a weekly masterclass in this dynamic. I'd show up in my 5-year-old polo shirt, and Tom would waltz in wearing a new jacket that cost more than my monthly utilities. Our parents, Robert and Diane, would fawn over him. I remember one particular dinner vividly. Tom was showing off a brand new PlayStation 5 he'd somehow acquired. "It's incredible," he was saying, his eyes gleaming. "The graphics are insane. You should come over and play sometime, Mark." He paused, then added with a sly grin, "Oh wait, you probably can't afford any of the new games anyway, right?" My father let out a booming laugh. "He's got you there, son." My mother just smiled, ruffling Tom's hair. "Let the boy have his fun, Mark." I just stared at my plate, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork. It wasn't the cost of the console. It was the hypocrisy. It was the memory of my mother calling me just last week, sighing about how the electric bill was just astronomical this month, and could I maybe chip in an extra $50? I had done it, of course. I always did. My father was more direct in his disapproval of my lifestyle. "You gotta live a little, son," he'd say, shaking his head with genuine pity. "People see you in that old beater. They think I didn't raise you right. It's embarrassing." To them, my frugality wasn't a sign of discipline. It was a sign of failure, a personal rejection of the American dream of bigger, better, newer. Tom, with his effortless consumption, was living up to their aspirations. I was a constant, disappointing reminder of their own financial anxieties. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday night. It was my dad. His voice, usually so full of bluster, was quiet and hollow. "Mark," he said, and I knew instantly something was wrong. I got laid off today. They're downsizing the whole department. After 15 years, they just showed me the door." A lead weight dropped into my stomach. That job wasn't just a job. It was my father's entire identity. The next day, I went over to the house. It was like walking into a wake. My mother's eyes were red and swollen. She laid out the financial apocalypse in horrifying detail. Tom's hefty college tuition payments, the mortgage, 2 car payments, one for her sensible sedan, one for Tom's sporty coupe, and the final, crushing blow, a mountain of credit card debt they'd been hiding, ballooning to over $25,000. Then, the three of them looked at me. It was a perfectly synchronized movement, a silent, desperate appeal. "We need you to move back home, Mark," my father said, the words costing him every ounce of his pride. If you could just help us out, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. Just for a little while, until your father gets back on his feet. We did the math. If you could contribute, say, $2,000 a month, that would cover the mortgage and Tom's tuition. It would be the only thing that could save us. $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year. The numbers screamed in my head. My beautiful spreadsheet, my 5-year plan, my dream of a front door with my own key. It all dissolved into smoke. I told them I needed to think about it. That night I called James. His reaction was swift and unequivocal. No, absolutely not. Mark, this is financial suicide. They are asking you to light your future on fire to keep them warm. If you are even thinking about this, you get a goddamn contract. A loan agreement with a repayment schedule. Notarized. This is a business transaction, not a family favor. Rebecca was even more blunt at work the next day. Are you kidding me? Mark, they enabled Tom's lifestyle for years while you were the responsible one. Now the bill has come due and they want you to pay it? You will move in, and you will never, ever get out. Don't do it. Their logic was flawless. But logic is a flimsy shield against a lifetime of emotional conditioning. I went to their house that evening armed with a speech about boundaries and alternative solutions. They could sell Tom's car. Tom could get a part-time job. I could help with a smaller, more manageable amount. I was going to be the rational adult in the room. I walked in to find my mother sitting alone in the darkened living room, a single lamp casting long shadows on the wall. She was crying, a soft, hopeless sound that tore at my insides. I'm so scared, Mark, she whispered, her face pale and streaked with tears. She took my hand, her fingers cold, and then she began to spin her tale. She told me, in more heart-wrenching detail than ever before, about her own childhood, about my grandma Wilson nearly losing their family farm to the bank after a bad harvest. She described the shame, the fear of losing their home, the cold-faced men from the bank showing up at the door with official papers. Your grandfather, she sobbed, her grip on my hand tightening. He had to go to his own brother, hat in hand, and beg for a loan to save them. And you know what his brother did, Mark? He made him sign a contract. Right there at the kitchen table. He treated him like a stranger, like a business risk. It broke your grandfather's heart. He said it was the greatest humiliation of his life. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears, her expression a perfect portrait of maternal desperation. Please don't do that to us. Don't do that to your father. He's already a broken man. I'm asking you as your mother. Are you telling me you don't trust me? And there it was, the checkmate. She had expertly cornered me, using the family's past trauma as a weapon against my future. To bring up a contract now would be to cast myself in the role of the heartless uncle. It would make me the villain of her story. It would prove I was the ungrateful, untrusting son they always secretly thought I was. All my logical arguments, all of James's and Rebecca's sound advice, crumbled into dust. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling like a surrender. Okay, Mom, I'll do it. I'll move home. The relief that washed over her face was so absolute it was almost terrifying. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of heroism and dread. I had saved my family, but I had a terrible, sinking feeling that, in doing so, I had just sentenced myself to prison. The only question was, for how long? The answer, I would soon discover, was far longer and more costly than I could ever have imagined. The first few months after I moved back were a carefully orchestrated performance of gratitude. It was almost convincing. My monthly $2,000 transfer was the miracle cure for the family's financial ailments. The oppressive tension that had choked the house lifted, replaced by an artificial cheerfulness. My mother started humming in the kitchen again, making my favorite meals as a special thank you. My father, on his way out for job interviews, would clap me on the shoulder, his voice thick with performative emotion. You're a good son, Mark. A real stand-up guy. Even Tom managed to grunt his appreciation once or twice between video game sessions. Hey, thanks for the tuition money, he said, not even looking up from his controller. This new history class is whatever. From Tom, that was practically a Shakespearean sonnet of praise. I dutifully transferred the money on the first of every month. Seeing that huge chunk of my salary vanish was a sharp pain, but I told myself it was a necessary sacrifice. I was the hero of this story, the responsible son stepping up in a crisis. I clung to that narrative like a life raft. I continued my Spartan lifestyle, packing my lunches for work and squirreling away the meager couple $100 I had left over. This was all temporary, I repeated to myself. A short-term detour. The detour got significantly longer about 3 months in. My dad landed a job. I was genuinely thrilled, bursting with relief. "Dad, this is fantastic news," I announced at dinner that night, a real smile on my face for the first time in ages. "This is great. I can start looking for apartments again." The cheerful atmosphere evaporated instantly. The smiles on their faces froze and shattered. "Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," my mother said, her voice taking on a sharp, warning edge. "This is good news. Yes, but we have to be realistic." My father cleared his throat, his expression turning grim. "It's a contract position, son. Not permanent. The pay is less than half of what I was making before, and there are no benefits. No health insurance. No retirement plan. We're actually in a more precarious position now, to be honest. One big medical bill and we're wiped out. We still need your help, more than ever, if we want to keep this house." It was a brilliant, airtight lie. It was specific, plausible, and dripping with just enough pathos to make me feel like a complete monster for even questioning it. To doubt him would be to accuse him of lying, to shatter his fragile, newly recovering pride. So, I did what I always did. I nodded. I agreed. I retreated to my basement room, the walls feeling a little closer, the temporary situation starting to feel terrifyingly permanent. And that's when the gratitude officially died. It wasn't a sudden death. It was a slow, agonizing decay. My $2,000 monthly contribution morphed from a lifeline into an entitlement. I was no longer the savior's son. I was the guy in the basement who paid the mortgage. And my presence was no longer a comfort. It was an annoyance. The complaints started small, like tiny paper cuts. "Mark, was that you in the shower for 20 minutes?" my mother would ask, holding up the water bill as if it were evidence in a murder trial. "We all have to do our part. Hey, buddy, can I borrow 20 for gas? I'll get you back on Friday," my father would say, and Friday would come and go in silence. Tom's behavior went from begrudgingly tolerant to openly contemptuous. His friends were over constantly, treating our house like their personal clubhouse. They'd descend on the refrigerator like a swarm of locusts, devouring the groceries I had carefully budgeted for and purchased. I'd come home from a long day at work to find a mountain of empty pizza boxes on the coffee table and my leftover lasagna from the night before gone. My first attempt to regain some control was a tactical disaster. Tired of seeing my money subsidize Tom's social life, I tried to implement some structure. I sat down one Sunday and created a detailed household budget on a spreadsheet. Food, utilities, everything. It was color-coded and logical. I thought if they could just see where the money was going, they would understand the need for some shared responsibility. I brought my laptop to the dinner table. "Hey guys," I began, trying to sound collaborative. I was looking at our expenses, and I think I found a few ways we could save a couple $100 a month if we just planned our meals a little. My father held up a hand, his face darkening. "Stop. Right there." His voice was low and menacing. "I am the man of this house. You will not come to my table and lecture me about budgets like I'm one of your idiotic clients. Do you understand me? I was just trying to help." I stammered, my face burning. "You help by paying what you agreed to pay," Tom sneered, not looking up from his phone. "That's your contribution. Stay in your lane." My mother remained silent, her silence a ringing endorsement of their position. The message was crystal clear. We want your money, not your input. I tried a different tactic. If they wouldn't budget, maybe I could lead by example. I started cooking big meals on weekends, casseroles, stews, things that could be eaten as leftovers during the week. One night, I made a huge pot of chili, enough to feed an army. I came home from work the next day, looking forward to a bowl, only to find the pot empty in the sink and a stack of greasy pizza boxes on the counter. "Oh, hi dear," my mother said, walking into the kitchen. Tom and his friends were studying. They needed brain food. She gestured to the pizza boxes. "I think there might be a slice of pepperoni left if you're hungry." It was death by 1,000 cuts. Every day, a new little humiliation, a new reminder of my place in this house. I wasn't family, I was a resource. My friends saw the toll it was taking. I had coffee with my old high school buddy, Kyle, one Saturday. He was a good guy, but he came from a big, enmeshed family and had a different perspective. "I don't know, man," he said, stirring his coffee. "It sounds rough, but they're your family. Sometimes you just gotta suck it up. Family is everything, right?" His words, meant to be comforting, just made me feel more trapped. Aunt Patricia, my mom's sister, saw it too. She came over for a visit one afternoon and caught my mother scolding me for leaving a light on in the basement. She pulled me aside as she was leaving. "Mark, are you okay?" she whispered, her eyes full of genuine concern. This doesn't feel right. They're using you." Her validation was a tiny pinprick of light in the darkness, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy. The final illusion of their financial struggle shattered on a random Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage, looking for a screwdriver. I opened the trunk of my dad's car to check his toolkit and saw it. Tucked in the corner was a brand new, gleaming set of Callaway golf clubs in a matching leather bag. I wasn't a golf expert, but I knew that was a significant purchase. At least $1,000, maybe more. My father, the man who claimed to be on a shoestring contract job, who borrowed gas money from me, had just dropped a fortune on a new hobby. The image burned itself into my mind. I started looking for other things. I became a forensic accountant of their lives. A few days later, my mom came home with a shopping bag from a designer store she frequented in her old life. She tried to whisk it into her closet, but I saw the logo. Later that evening, citing a need for a spare blanket, I went into her closet. Tucked away in the back was a new Michael Kors purse. Easily $500. The picture was becoming horribly clear. They weren't just struggling and making a few poor choices. They were living a double life. One life was the poor, downtrodden family they presented to me. The other was a life of secret luxuries, funded by their own mysterious income stream and subsidized by my monthly sacrifice. They weren't just my family in need. They were liars. They were thieves. And they were stealing my future, one golf club and one designer handbag at a time. The quiet rage that had been simmering in my gut for months began to boil. I was done being a victim. I was done being a fool. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The discovery of the golf clubs and the handbag flipped a switch in my brain. I was no longer a passive contributor to the family finances. I was an active, albeit secret, investigator. My life in the basement took on a clandestine quality. I'd wait until they were all asleep, then creep upstairs to try and make sense of the puzzle. I felt like a burglar in what was supposedly my own home, my heart pounding every time a floorboard creaked. One night, I managed to get onto the family computer. My dad, for all his bluster, used a ridiculously simple password. Password 123. I felt a pang of guilt as I logged in, but it was quickly replaced by a cold determination. I started digging. I went through browser histories, deleted files, anything I could find. It was mostly junk, but then I found it, buried in the trash folder. An email confirmation for a dinner reservation from a few weeks prior. It was for Le Chateau, the most expensive French restaurant in the city. The reservation was for two. The total on the prepaid anniversary menu was over $400. I remembered that night clearly. They had told me they were going to the local diner for a quiet bite. Another lie. Each discovery was like a small stone added to a heavy pack on my back. The real earthquake, the one that shook the very foundations of my world, came from the most unlikely of sources. My Uncle Steve. My dad's brother was a loud, boisterous man who had always treated me with a sort of jovial condescension. He and my dad had a complicated relationship, a mix of brotherly love and lifelong rivalry. It was the 4th of July. The whole extended family was at our house for a barbecue. The backyard was filled with smoke from the grill, the sounds of kids laughing, and the endless drone of my uncles debating sports. I was on grill duty, a role I preferred as it allowed me to be busy and avoid conversation. Uncle Steve, a can of beer in his hand, ambled over to my dad, who was standing near me. "I'm telling you, Bobby, leaving that old plant was the best thing that ever happened to you," he boomed, clapping my dad on the back so hard he stumbled. His voice was loud, meant to be heard. "This new gig as a regional director at Axton Global? You're finally getting paid what you're worth. That's a hell of a package you negotiated." Hell of a package. The world seemed to slow down. The sizzle of the burgers on the grill became a roar in my ears. Regional director? Axton Global? Paying you what you're worth? The phrases collided in my head with the story I'd been fed for over a year. Contract position, pay cut, no benefits. I saw my dad's face go pale with panic. He shot his brother a sharp, frantic look. A silent, desperate plea to shut up. Uncle Steve, oblivious, just kept grinning. "Ah, you know how it is, Steve," my dad stammered, attempting a casual laugh that came out as a strangled cough. "It's all just numbers on paper. The stress is the real killer." He quickly grabbed his brother by the elbow and steered him towards the drinks cooler, away from me. But it was too late. The words were out. They were real, and they confirmed my worst fears. The lie wasn't just a little white lie to keep me at home. It was a massive, intricate, long-term deception. They weren't taking my money to survive. They were taking it to thrive. It was a luxury tax, a convenience fee I was paying on my own life so they could live theirs better. The anger that surged through me was so white-hot it was clarifying. It burned away all the guilt, all the confusion, all the misplaced loyalty. I had to get away. I handed the grill tongs to a cousin and walked to the far end of the yard, just to breathe. I looked back and saw my father, his moment of panic over, now laughing and joking with his brother. He was a phenomenal actor, a true professional. That night, my mission changed. It wasn't about getting out anymore. It was about getting answers. I needed to confront them with something so undeniable they couldn't lie their way out of it. My chance came a week later, on a sweltering July evening. I came home late from work, exhausted and dreading the forced pleasantries. As I walked through the living room, I saw them, the familiar tribunal. My mom, my dad, and Tom, all huddled around the coffee table, their heads bent over a glowing laptop screen. They were whispering and laughing with a genuine excitement I hadn't seen in years. The moment I entered their line of sight, they went dead silent. My mother, with a guilty start, slammed the laptop shut. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice a pitch too high, too bright. "You're home. We were just, looking at some old family photos." The lie was so clumsy, so insulting in its lack of effort, that I didn't even bother to acknowledge it. "What were you really looking at?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I walked over to the coffee table and put my hand on the closed laptop. "It's nothing, Mark." "Really?" my dad said, shifting his body as if to block me. But I was faster. I flipped the laptop open. The screen flared to life, displaying a vibrant, sun-drenched webpage. White sand beaches, impossibly blue water, swim-up bars. The banner at the top was unmistakable. "Your all-inclusive luxury vacation to Cancun awaits." I stared at the screen, at the pictures of happy, carefree families, and then I looked up at their three guilty faces. "Cancun," I whispered, the word feeling foreign and absurd. Tom, ever the agent of chaos, decided to shatter the tension with pure, unadulterated cruelty. He laughed. "Yeah, Cancun. We're going in 2 weeks. Just the three of us. It's gonna be sick." "Just the three of you?" The words felt like they were scraped from my throat. "How in the world can you afford this?" "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, dear," my mother said, waving a dismissive hand, as if I were a child asking about grown-up matters. "You have to work anyway. Someone has to be responsible." The condescension, the sheer hypocrisy of that statement, was the final straw. The dam of 2 years of swallowed anger, of silent resentment, of constant humiliation, finally broke. Work? Of course I have to work. My voice started to rise, shaking with a fury I couldn't contain. I have to work to pay you $2,000 every single month. Money that is apparently paying for your 5-star tropical vacation. Oh, here we go, my father muttered, rolling his eyes in a perfect imitation of a long-suffering parent. Always keeping score. Always throwing the money in our faces. We can't have one nice thing. Keeping score. I was yelling now, the sound raw and ragged in the quiet room. You lied to me. For years. Uncle Steve told me about your job. Your big promotion. You're making more money than you ever have. And you're still bleeding me dry. The air crackled. The masks were gone. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury. My father's jaw was set like concrete. Tom just looked bored. He actually yawned. God, Mark. Can you not be so dramatic? I've been working really hard at school. I deserve this trip. You're just jealous. The breathtaking selfishness of that sentence stole my voice. I looked at the three of them, my mother, my father, my brother, my family, and I felt nothing. No love, no connection. Just the chilling recognition that I was looking at three strangers who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their own happiness. I didn't have another word in me. I just shook my head, turned, and walked away. I went down to my basement room and shut the door, the sound echoing the final closing of a chapter in my life. I knew it was over. The only thing left was the final, ugly detonation. I had no idea it would come so soon, or that they would choose my own birthday to light the fuse. The week that followed the Cancun confrontation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. A thick, icy silence blanketed the house, far more menacing than any yelling match. We were ghosts haunting the same hallways, communicating only through the slam of a door or the scrape of a chair. The unspoken truth was a living entity in the house with us. They knew I knew everything. I knew they were plotting their next move. It was a high-stakes game of chicken, and I was just waiting for the inevitable head-on collision. The morning of my 29th birthday dawned gray and cheerless, a perfect reflection of my mood. The silence in the house was absolute. No perfunctory happy birthday mumbled over the coffee pot. No cheap card left on the kitchen counter. It was just another Tuesday. I went to work and tried to lose myself in quarterly reports, but the numbers blurred into meaningless squiggles. My brain was stuck in a loop, replaying the last 2 years of my life, searching for a single moment of genuine affection from them. I came up empty. My friends at work, bless their hearts, saved me from complete despair. Rebecca organized a small group to take me out for lunch at a nearby diner. They bought me a gift card to a bookstore and sang a mercifully brief and off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. For one precious hour, surrounded by people who actually seemed to like me, I felt a flicker of normalcy. It was a painful reminder of what I was missing. The drive home was heavy. A profound sadness settled over me, the kind that feels physical, like a weight on your chest. Was this what my life had become? A series of small kindnesses from friends to offset the massive cruelty of my own family? On a desperate impulse, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. I walked through the automatic doors and headed to the bakery section. I stood there for a long time, staring at the elaborate, joyful cakes, before settling on the saddest one they had. A small, 6-inch vanilla cake with garish blue frosting. It looked like a child's party favor. I paid for it, placed it on the passenger seat beside me, and drove the rest of the way home, feeling like the world's biggest cliché. When I walked through the front door, the scene was a chilling echo of the Cancun confrontation, but this time it was imbued with a terrifying sense of ceremony. My parents and Tom were all dressed nicely. My dad wore a pressed collared shirt, my mom a formal dress she hadn't worn in years. They were seated at the dining room table, the special occasion table. And in the center, casting a long shadow, was a large, immaculately wrapped gift. A small, stupid, stubbornly hopeful part of my brain whispered, maybe they feel bad. Maybe this is their apology. A grand gesture. I crept into the kitchen and hid my pathetic little cake behind the fruit bowl, as if ashamed of it. "Happy birthday, Mark," my mother said. Her voice was as smooth and cold as polished granite. "We have something for you," my father said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the box. My feet felt like they were encased in lead as I approached the table. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the perfectly tied ribbon and tore away the expensive paper. It was a suitcase. A sleek, black, hardshell suitcase. The kind you see wheeled through first-class airport lounges. Expensive. Impersonal. Final. I looked up from the suitcase to their expectant faces. "A suitcase?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Are we all going on a trip?" I knew the answer, but I had to hear them say it. "No, Mark," my mother said, dropping the last shred of pretense. Her voice was sharp now, cutting. "You are going somewhere. We want you to pack your things in that suitcase and get out of our house." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I literally staggered back a step, my hand flying to my chest as if to keep my heart from beating its way out. "Get out," I choked out. "You're kicking me out?" On my birthday, Tom, who had been watching the entire exchange with the rapt attention of someone watching the finale of his favorite TV show, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. "Yep," he said, popping the pea. "I'm finally getting my closet back. Gonna be epic. I'm thinking a whole wall for my sneakers." "Why?" The word was a raw, ragged tear in the silence. "After everything, after 2 years of supporting you, why?" My father leaned back in his chair, a cruel, self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He looked like a man who had just won a long and satisfying game. "Because we are sick and tired of your attitude," he said, savoring each word. "We are sick of you walking around here like a silent, judgmental martyr. We are sick of you and your sad little budget." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. I had one card left to play, one final piece of truth. My voice was dangerously quiet when I spoke. "You want to know the real reason? Is it because it's getting too hard to keep up the lie, now that I know about your job? The one at Axton Global? The regional director position? It's on your public LinkedIn profile, Dad." I saw it. I had expected them to be flustered. I had expected angry denials, a frantic attempt to backtrack. I did not expect my mother to laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of humor, a sharp, ugly bark that scraped at my nerves. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. The loving, maternal mask she had worn for 29 years had finally disintegrated, revealing the cold, hard face beneath. "Oh, you think you're so smart, don't you?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You and your little internet searches. Yes, he's a regional director. And you know what else, you ungrateful child? He got that promotion 6 months ago." The world stopped. Time itself seemed to freeze. 6 months. For half a year, they had been living on a massive 6-figure salary. For 6 months, while I was agonizing over every dollar, dutifully transferring my money, they had been flush with cash. The lies hadn't been about survival. They had been about sport. She wasn't done. She stood up, leaning her knuckles on the table, her face twisted with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "Did you really think your pathetic little $2,000 a month mattered to us? It was a drop in the bucket. We didn't need your money, Mark. We just felt you owed us. Consider it payback for the burden of raising you. For every dollar we had to spend on you instead of on something we actually wanted. You have always been a disappointment. A joyless, ungrateful child. Ungrateful." The word hung in the air, a final poison dart. It was their ultimate justification. They had rewritten history, casting themselves as the long-suffering victims and me as the perpetual debtor who could never repay the gift of his own existence. I looked at my father, who just nodded in solemn agreement with his wife's vicious tirade. I looked at Tom, who was smiling, a wide, genuine smile of pure happiness. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It turned to dust. The last, fragile filament of hope that connected me to these people, the hope that deep down they loved me, was obliterated. A strange, preternatural calm settled over me. There were no more tears to cry. There was no more anger to feel. There was just a vast, empty clarity. "Okay," I said, my voice unnervingly even. I reached out and took the handle of the brand new suitcase. "I understand now." I turned and walked towards the stairs, my back straight, my head held high. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. As I descended into the basement, I heard them begin to talk again, their voices light and cheerful, liberated. A few moments later, I heard the distinct sound of a knife cutting through a cake, followed by laughter. They were eating my birthday cake, my sad little vanilla cake. I didn't pack frantically. I packed with a cold, deliberate precision. I packed my clothes, my work documents, my laptop. I left the furniture. I left the books. I left every single thing that reminded me of the 2 years I had spent in that basement, a ghost in my own life. Everything that mattered fit into that suitcase and a single cardboard box. An hour later, I walked up the stairs and out the front door for the last time. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I sat on the curb under the pale glow of a street lamp, placed the suitcase neatly beside me, and pulled out my phone to call an Uber. As I waited, I finally allowed myself one single, bitter laugh that tore through the quiet night. They were right about one thing. I really did owe them. I owed them for finally, brutally setting me free. The Uber ride was a silent, blurry journey through the city's sleeping streets. I had the driver drop me off at the first motel I found online that had a vacancy and accepted cash. The sign was a flickering neon mess, with the T in motel burned out, making it look like a sad, misspelled plea. The man behind the bulletproof glass at the front desk barely glanced at me as he took my money and slid a key card under the partition. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, industrial-strength bleach, and a deep, abiding despair. The carpet was sticky in spots, and the floral bedspread had a pattern that seemed designed to hide a multitude of sins. I dropped the suitcase, my one and only birthday present, on the floor with a thud. The sound echoed in the small, grim room. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The adrenaline that had been a roaring fire in my veins for hours finally burned out, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For the first time in 2 years, I was completely and utterly alone, with no one to please, no one to placate, and no one to pretend for. I was untethered, and it was terrifying. The full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. It wasn't just that they kicked me out. It was the how, the calculated cruelty of it. The suitcase, the timing, the laughter. They hadn't just severed a tie. They had taken a razor blade and shredded it, then set the pieces on fire and danced on the ashes. These were not the actions of people who had simply fallen out of love with their child. These were the actions of enemies. I felt a wave of shame so powerful it made me nauseous. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I been so blind, so willing to believe their lies? I thought about James and Rebecca, about their warnings that I had so cavalierly dismissed. They had seen the truth from the very beginning. I had been the fool, willfully walking into the trap because I was too desperate for the approval of people who were incapable of giving it. I didn't call anyone that night. The shame was too great. How do you even begin to explain a betrayal so complete? How do you say, my family played me for a fool for 2 years, stole almost $50,000, and then threw me out on my birthday? It sounded too dramatic to be real. So I just sat there, in that dingy motel room, letting the silence and the despair wash over me. I needed to feel the rock bottom, to know exactly how far I had fallen, before I could even think about trying to climb back up. Sometime before dawn, I finally fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the morning sun was streaming through a crack in the cheap vinyl curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I felt different. The despair was still there, a low, constant hum beneath the surface, but it was joined by something else. Tiny, hard ember of defiance. They had taken my past, but they were not going to take my future. They were not going to break me. I had a job I was good at. I had friends who cared about me, and I had a few $100s in my checking account. It wasn't much, but it was a foundation. A foundation built on my own 2 feet, not on their lies. I showered in the tiny, grimy bathroom, the weak stream of lukewarm water feeling like a baptism. I put on my work clothes, and then I pulled out my phone and made the call I should have made the night before. Rebecca. My voice was hoarse. Mark. Oh my God. Where are you? I was so worried when you didn't answer my birthday texts last night. Is everything okay? And just like that, the dam broke. The words came tumbling out in a raw, jumbled mess. The suitcase, the promotion lie, the Cancun trip, the birthday cake, the final, venomous speech from my mother. I told her everything, pacing back and forth in that tiny room, the story pouring out of me like a poison I had to get out. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finally ran out of words, my throat raw, there was a brief pause. Then she said, her voice a steel blade wrapped in velvet. Okay, what's the address of that hellhole? I'm coming to get you right now. You're staying with me. My spare room is a disaster zone, but it's better than that. We will figure this out, Mark. I promise. An hour later, her familiar, reliable car pulled into the motel parking lot. She got out, took one look at my face, and without a single word, she pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a pitying hug. It was a fierce, grounding hug that said, "You are not alone." And I almost broke down right there, surrounded by peeling paint and faded dreams. Moving into Rebecca's spare room was like stepping out of a dark, cramped cave into the sunshine. Her small apartment was bright, clean, and filled with plants. Felt alive. With her help, I found a small studio apartment of my own within a week. It was tiny, even smaller than my first place, but the landlord handed me the key and said, "Welcome home," and the words felt sacred. James came through like the champion he was. He scoured Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, finding me a cheap second-hand bed, a wobbly desk, and a chair. He and our old high school buddy, Kyle, showed up with a pickup truck and helped me move everything in. We celebrated that night with cheap pizza and a 6-pack of beer, sitting on the floor of my mostly empty apartment. Surrounded by my real friends, laughing until my sides hurt, I felt more at home than I ever had in the sprawling, loveless house I had just left. With the constant, crushing weight of my family's drama lifted from my shoulders, something incredible happened. It was like a fog had cleared from my mind. At work, I felt a surge of creative energy and focus I hadn't realized I'd lost. There was a huge, high-stakes project our team had been grappling with for months. A major new campaign for our biggest, most demanding client. I had been too drained and distracted to contribute much before, but now, I saw the problems with a new clarity. I dove in headfirst. I started staying late, not out of obligation, but out of passion. I sketched out new ideas, I dug deep into the market research, I built a presentation from the ground up that I knew was the best, most innovative work of my career. It was more than just a project. It was my declaration of independence, a testament to what I was capable of when I wasn't being emotionally and financially drained. The day of the big presentation, I stood in the boardroom in front of my boss, Jennifer, and the client's executive team. I felt nervous, but it was a sharp, electric nervousness, not the dull, anxious dread I had lived with for 2 years. It was the thrill of the challenge. I laid out the new strategy, the creative concepts, the projected ROI. I spoke with a confidence that felt both foreign and completely natural. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then the client's CEO, a notoriously tough man to impress, leaned forward and smiled. "That," he said, "is the most impressive and well-reasoned pitch I have seen in 5 years." Jennifer was practically glowing. The next day, she called me into her office and closed the door. "Mark," she said, her usual no-nonsense demeanor softened by a proud smile. "That was brilliant. Simply brilliant. I've had my eye on you for a while, but what you did yesterday was next level. The senior marketing manager position for the entire division is opening up next quarter. I want you to have it. It's a significant pay raise and a hell of a lot more responsibility, but you've more than earned it." I was floored. Senior manager. It wasn't just a title or a bigger paycheck. It was validation. It was irrefutable proof, delivered by the outside world, that I was not the failure my family had spent my entire life telling me I was. I had value. I was capable. Walking out of her office, I felt a sense of pride so pure and powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I had lost the family I was born into, but I was finally finding myself. And my new life was just getting started. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding. I threw myself into my new role at work and excelled. The fog of constant stress and anxiety had been replaced by a sharp, clear focus. Without the $2,000 black hole sucking my income dry every month, my savings account, my beautiful, neglected savings account, began to recover at a dizzying pace. The numbers on my house down payment spreadsheet, which had been stagnant for 2 long years, started to climb. The dream I had been forced to abandon was no longer a distant fantasy. It was a tangible, achievable goal. I had maintained a strict no-contact policy. My parents' numbers, Tom's number, even the numbers of enabling relatives like Uncle Steve, all blocked. It was a period of enforced silence that I desperately needed to heal and recalibrate my sense of self. My new-found family rallied around me. Sunday dinners became something I looked forward to. Potluck meals at Rebecca's or my place, filled with easy laughter and genuine affection. My relationship with Rebecca deepened in a way that felt both exciting and incredibly safe. She had seen me at my absolute lowest and hadn't flinched. She had been my unwavering ally, and I was falling completely in love with her. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly happy. And, of course, that's when they tried to drag me back into the abyss. One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. My gut clenched. I had a feeling I knew who it was, but I answered anyway. I had to know what their next move was. Mark. The voice was a sickening concoction of sweetness and sorrow. It was my mother. My own voice was cold and hard, a stranger to me. What do you want? Oh, honey, I've just been so worried about you. We haven't heard from you. We need to talk. Can you please come over to the house? No, I said, the word a steel door slamming shut. Whatever you have to say, you can say it right now. A long, dramatic sigh came through the phone, the sound of a martyr preparing for a great burden. It's your father, she began, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. That company he was with, they lost a major contract. The whole division was laid off. He's out of a job again, Mark. The bills are piling up. We're falling behind. We really need your help. I was so stunned by the sheer, unmitigated gall of it that I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and bitter. Let me see if I have this straight, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You lie to me for years, steal almost $50,000 from me, throw me out of the house on my birthday like a piece of trash, and now, 6 months later, you're calling me for a handout? Are you actually insane? We made a mistake, she whimpered, the crocodile tears starting to flow. We were under so much stress. We weren't thinking clearly. But you're our son. Family is supposed to forgive and forget. There is nothing to forgive because there is nothing left, I said, my voice as cold as the grave. This family is closed for business. I am not moving back. I am not giving you another dime. Not now, not ever. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before she could reply and immediately blocked the new number. I naively thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. It was just the opening salvo in their final, desperate campaign of terror. The calls started coming from other numbers, other relatives. Then the tactics escalated. Tom started showing up at my office building, lurking in the lobby until security had to escort him out. He'd yell things like, "You're tearing this family apart," as they dragged him away. One evening, my father was waiting by my car in the parking garage. He tried to block my path, his face a mask of desperation, launching into a sob story about the foreclosure notices. I didn't say a word. I just got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away, leaving him standing there under the flickering fluorescent lights. My cousin Melissa, Tom's staunchest ally, began a text message harassment campaign. Long, rambling messages about loyalty, about how I was being selfish, how I was breaking my mother's heart. It was a full-court press of emotional blackmail, a coordinated attack designed to wear me down and make me feel guilty. But it didn't work. The man they were targeting no longer existed. I was immune to their poison now. The spell was irrevocably broken. Then, 2 weeks later, they unleashed their nuclear option. I was at my desk when an email landed in my inbox. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Official legal notice regarding financial obligation." My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands started to shake as I clicked it open. It was a formal letter of intent, a clear precursor to a full-blown lawsuit. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. It claimed that their clients, Robert and Diane Wilson, were demanding payment from me. Not for room and board. They were smarter than that. The letter alleged that I had entered into a binding verbal agreement to finance the entirety of my brother Tom's college education, and that, by cutting off payments, I was in breach of that contract. They were demanding $30,000, the estimated remainder of his tuition and living expenses. The room began to spin. They had taken my act of rescue and twisted it into a legal shackle. It was a complete and utter lie, but it was printed on official legal letterhead. It was terrifying. I immediately forwarded the email to James. I called him, my voice trembling. "James, you are not going to believe the level they've stooped to." He called me back within 10 minutes. His voice was calm, but it was the calm of a general preparing for battle. "Okay," he said, a dangerous edge to his words. "So they've decided to play stupid, evil games. Don't you worry for 1 second, Mark. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. But we're not just going to defend. We are going to attack. These people are not your family anymore. They are extortionists, and we are going to treat them as such." James spent the next day crafting a response. It was not just a letter. It was a legal tomahawk missile. It meticulously acknowledged their claim of a verbal agreement and then systematically demolished it. It pointed out that my documented payments of $48,000 far exceeded any reasonable cost for tuition alone and were clearly intended as general family support, for which they had repeatedly expressed gratitude. Then came the kill shot. James's letter stated that should they be foolish enough to pursue this baseless and fraudulent claim, we would not hesitate to file a countersuit. The countersuit would be for the full $48,000 I had paid, plus all associated legal fees, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. He specifically cited the fact that my father had been gainfully employed at a significantly higher salary for a large portion of the period in question, a fact we could easily verify through discovery. He even included a delicately worded paragraph hinting at the possibility of pursuing criminal charges for extortion. As an attachment, he included a PDF of my bank statements, highlighting the 24 consecutive $2,000 transfers. He sent the draft to me. "This is the weapon, Mark," he said over the phone. "It's loaded. You just have to give the order to fire." For a fleeting moment I hesitated. This was the point of no return. This was burning the final bridge to the ground and salting the earth. But then I thought of the suitcase. I thought of my birthday cake being eaten by my enemies. I thought of the cold, dead look in my mother's eyes. They had burned the bridge long ago. I was just clearing the wreckage. "Fire it," I said. James sent the email. 3 days passed in an agony of silence. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Then, an email appeared in my inbox from James. The subject line was one word: "Done." I opened it. It was a forwarded message from their lawyer. It contained a single, beautiful sentence. "After careful consideration, my clients have elected not to pursue this matter any further." The harassment stopped that day. The calls, the visits, the texts, it all went dead silent. It was finally truly over. A few days later, I asked James if I could do one last thing. He advised against it, calling it unnecessary, but I needed it. I needed to be the one to put the final nail in the coffin. I texted my father from my new number. "Meet me at the Starbucks on Main Street, 10 a.m. Saturday. Come alone. This is not a request." To my shock, he agreed. He looked smaller in person, diminished. The arrogant bluster was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. He started to open his mouth, no doubt to launch into another well-rehearsed sob story. But I held up a hand, cutting him off. "You don't get to talk," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I do. I didn't ask you here to reconcile. I asked you here to deliver a message in person. You are not my family anymore. You are not my father. You are a stranger to me. And if you, or your wife, or your son, or anyone associated with you, ever tries to contact me or my friends again in any way, shape, or form, the next letter you receive won't be a warning from my lawyer. It will be a summons from the court." I pulled out a printed copy of James's devastating letter and slid it across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This is what will happen," I said. "Read it. Memorize it. Understand it. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. We are done." He stared at the papers, his face turning a pasty, ashen gray. For the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not anger, not defiance. Just the raw, primal fear of a man who has finally, irrevocably lost control. I stood up from the table. "Goodbye, Robert." I walked out of that coffee shop into the bright sunshine and didn't look back. I felt a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying lift off my shoulders. I was free. I was finally, completely, and gloriously free. A year after that final, sterile meeting in the coffee shop, my life had transformed into something I scarcely recognized. My role as senior marketing manager was challenging, rewarding, and I was good at it. My savings account, once a source of constant anxiety, had not only recovered but had grown beyond my most optimistic projections. Last month, I sat in a lawyer's office, the scent of paper and success in the air, and signed the final documents on a 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The dream that had been my North Star for so long, the dream that had been stolen and deferred, was finally real. It was mine. News from my old life trickled in occasionally, mostly through my Aunt Patricia. She had become my staunchest, if most distant, family ally. After learning the full, ugly truth of what had happened, she had confronted my parents, and the fallout had been apocalyptic. She told me in a quiet phone call that Robert was still unemployed, his pride too great to take a lesser job. The big house, their symbol of suburban success, was in pre-foreclosure. Tom, stripped of his endless allowance, had been forced to transfer to a less prestigious and far less expensive state college. He was working part-time at a fast food joint to pay for his gas and beer money. Reality, it turned out, had a bill that always came due. In her most profound act of defiance, Aunt Patricia had packed up my grandmother's things and moved her into her own home. "I will not let them exploit that good woman for one more day," she had told me, her voice fierce with protective love. Sometimes, late at night, in the quiet of my new home, I'd feel a faint, ghost-like pang of sadness for the family I was supposed to have, for the love I was supposed to have been given. But the feeling was fleeting, quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace and gratitude for the life I was building. Last weekend, I stood in the empty living room of my townhouse. The walls were a blank canvas of fresh paint, filled with the scent of new beginnings. The keys felt solid and heavy in my hand. I was about to lock up and leave when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but my heart knew instantly who it was. My grandmother. The message was simple, just a handful of words that held the weight of a lifetime. "I'm proud of you, son. You found your strength." Tears I didn't know I still had welled up in my eyes. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything." Later that evening, I was on the phone with Rebecca. We were planning the housewarming party, a real one this time. "Okay, so definitely James and Kyle," I said, scribbling names on a notepad. "And Miguel, and the whole team from work who helped out on the big project. It's going to be a full house," she said, her voice warm with laughter. I smiled, looking around at the empty rooms that would soon be filled with noise, with life, with love. "Yeah," I said, the word catching in my throat. "It's time to have the family over." And in that moment, I knew I had finally found my real home. It wasn't a building made of wood and drywall. It was the people who chose to love me, who respected me, who celebrated my successes and supported me in my failures. It was a family built not on the shaky foundation of obligation, but on the solid bedrock of respect, laughter, and cheap pizza eaten on the floor of an empty apartment. It was a foundation that could never be broken. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way, and maybe even gave you a little bit of strength. The world can be a tough place, and sometimes the people who are supposed to lift you up are the ones holding you down. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and the expectations of others? I'd be honored to read your story. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Take care of yourselves.